great things with jazz is that it's such a varied and diverse kind of art form. So luckily, I think there's an entry point for everyone.
Hey, together, we are back with a new interview this time. You hear it's this time in English. That's because we have an awesome guest this time, and I am very happy that he's here. Without any further ado, Skye, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the English as well. This would be a very awkward interview in German. We would run out very quickly.
Maybe for you, but
fair enough.
And it would be a nice setup actually to have one person speak English, one person speak German, and nobody knows what we're talking about.
Or if you hadn't told me that we were going to do it in German, and then you just went for it.
Damn, next time.
It actually reminds me of one of my all-time great pickup stories at an airport that I flew into Berlin, and you know, you don't always like arrange with the organizers how you're going to get picked up, and
that kind of pickup. Gotcha.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, but I came out of the baggage claim, and I was just sort of looking around, and I met this woman's eyes, and she kind of met mine, and we were like, oh, hey, okay. And I went up, and I went to like shake her hand, and she was like, oh, no, and she came in and gave me kisses. I was like, oh yeah, that's fine, okay, it's fine. And we started walking out, and I was like, oh, how's the event going? And are you guys like pretty much ready? She was like, yeah. But why are we speaking in English? We should speak in German. And I was like, well, you know, American, I don't know any German. You could have some bad Swedish if you want a little bad Swedish. And she was like, no, but when we did the interview, like we spoke in German the whole time. And I was like, no, you must be misremembering. Like, I don't know, maybe we did an interview. And all of a sudden we've gotten out to the parking lot, and all of a sudden she just looks at me and goes, and runs away from me. And I realized like we've just been walking with a total stranger. She was picking up somebody else.
I would have been curious which event she would have drove you to.
I know, exactly. I know. Oh, amazing.
Maybe you would have been like a marketing speaker or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That would be the real terror, when they suddenly just put you on stage. The topic, you don't know what you're talking about.
It would be fun. So, but what I actually, I'm just gonna go right into it. What I'm really curious about with you is there's something I really want to ask you for a long time. You always look so effortless when you're dancing.
Oh, thank you.
And to me, like that is something really astonishing, because there are amazing performers out there, not only in Lindy Hop but in other dances as well. But to have somebody who makes complex things look effortless, to me is a whole different game. Is there something like, where do you think this comes from? Like that you have such an easygoing way of performing and dancing in general?
That's very nice of you. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I can think of a couple things that spring to mind. One thing, and I don't know when it sort of dawned on me, but at some point, kind of watching old clips of Lindy Hop and other performers from back in the day, you realize watching something like Hellzapop and how much it doesn't look like the dancers are. Like, it looks amazing, and when you first watch it, you seem like, oh, this is inhuman, this is amazing, they must be killing themselves to do this incredible performance. But then when you actually watch it after a while, you realize like it doesn't look hard when they're doing it. And so I do think kind of early on, having sort of seen that from the older dancers, I did want to bring that into my dancing. And so it was definitely a goal. So it's very nice to hear that it's coming across. But in terms of actually getting there, I mean, maybe teaching is one thing that helps, that so much of my dancing is done in a class in front of people, and is trying to kind of get across the thing that I'm doing. So not only do I get a lot of practice, but practice of trying to show someone exactly what I'm doing. You probably experienced that, how it helps you kind of get to the center of the step. yeah, I don't know. Again, I appreciate it, but I don't know other than that.
Yeah, for me in teaching, what helps is teaching makes you really think about it. So you have to, in a way, you have to be able to deconstruct it in a very, very deep level, and also to try to figure out what you're doing with different mindsets, because everybody works different. So, for example, I'm trying to sometimes use different words for the same thing, because especially when you're teaching regular classes, it feels like, and I'm sorry if some of my students are listening, but it feels like I'm talking about the same stuff every week and trying to say it with different words, because I feel like, okay, maybe last week they didn't get it, so I tried this way from the other side, and then from this angle, and then from that angle. So yeah, I could see that teaching is a big point of that.
That's interesting, and I mean, I definitely relate to what you're saying about words. I think for my teaching as well, I've always really tried to make the movement itself do as much of the speaking as possible. And so I want to always try and get across as much of what I'm doing with the movement itself as possible, as I'm sure is the case for everyone who's teaching. But I think that is part of it, that clarity that you described with language, trying to find that in movement as well. Yeah, it's a good discipline as a teacher.
I've been listening to a couple of interviews with you to prepare for this.
Yeah.
And in one interview you said that your mom made you swing dance, or like she brought you to swing dancing. Is that true?
Yeah, she danced. She did Lindy Hop, and then West Coast swing, and what we call jitterbug, like 6 count. Mm-hmm. And there was quite a flourishing scene in the small town that I'm from, Ithaca, New York. And she'd been doing it for quite a few years, and had always sort of been like, "Oh, Skye, would you be interested in doing this?" And I don't know why or how she knew that I would be, because I certainly didn't know it at first, and was pretty resistant in the beginning. But yeah, the idea kind of grew over a couple of years for me, and some of my friends, their parents also danced, and so we all started together. Ramona Staffeld, who's another person who still dances and teaches, and actually works with Remy quite a bit. We went to kindergarten together, and her parents also danced, so we knew each other for a long time. And so as my friends started to pick it up from their parents, I sort of, I let my mom sort of force me into it. It's hard looking back to see how much I maybe wanted to try it, but needed the push. How much she sort of forced me.
Yeah, I saw a video of you and Ramona doing like a Lindy Hop Juniors competition, where you both are wearing completely dressed in black. I don't know if you know that video.
Yes, I saw this now. Maybe from what's the US Open, maybe, or something.
Yes, I think it was US Open. I'd like the first time I watched it, because by now I'm much more into West Coast swing. I looked at it like, is Skye dancing West Coast swing there? The style looked so much different. Like it was like so much smoother, and like you had a lot of like a whip element in it and everything. So it almost felt like dances were more connected back then. Like it was more similar.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the scene that I grew up in, Ithaca, the Swing Dance Network there was a kind of a community organization, amazing group of people who were doing dancings. And there was a real kind of, everybody did some West Coast swing, some Lindy Hop, and some, again, what we call jitterbug. And at the dance, they would play kind of like 2 Lindy Hop songs, 2 West Coast songs, 2 Lindy Hop songs, 2 West Coast songs. Or 1-1, something like that. So in the scene that I grew up in, like the connection between Lindy Hop and West Coast was a lot stronger than it was some other places. And that was true at that time. It seemed like the notion of swing dances where everyone would kind of be in the same room doing West Coast and Lindy Hop was a bit more common. There were a lot of events, crossover events, where people would do both. And I remember pretty early on we saw Carolina Shag Dancers and that really made a big impact on us. We like the West Coast swing stuff, but the Carolina Shag really spoke to us.
Yeah. Did you do a lot of competitions when you were younger? Was it a big thing of you growing up or like starting dancing?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. It was very much a social dance scene, and there were some competitions. But when we started, there was like this big kind of neo swing surge, and so there was a bunch of like bars would put on competitions and stuff. There was like kind of common to have competitions at dances and stuff at random places where they would give away money and stuff. So we did like go out to a fair number of those competitions when we could get in. I mean, we were 14, 12, whatever it was. We couldn't always get into the bar, but if we could get in, we would do those small things. So there was those small local competitions. And then a couple years after I'd been dancing, maybe 3, 4 years, there was a big Lindy Hop competition that we went to. And from then on, we'd go a couple times a year. There was the American Lindy Hop Championships, and then there was a competition called the North Atlantic Dance Championships, run by Bill Cameron. And that was a real like crossover event. So we would go to that, and then we started going to the US Open sometimes. So there'd be like 3 or 4 a year, but it wasn't a competitive scene in the way that, say, Boogie Woogie or like the Swedish scene or some of the scenes in Germany or in France. Like it didn't have that competitive aspect of a group that trains and goes.
Yeah. So do you think that the Lindy Hop scene got more competitive, or did it always stay the same? Because I can tell you how I feel about it. I feel like in the US you do competitions a lot more, like, or you did it before as well. But it always felt like there was, like, as you said, there was a different attitude to competing. Like I have many friends that tell me like they would compete someday, but they're only gonna compete when they know they're gonna win.
Yeah.
Them, that means you will never compete, basically. There are other people, like we have the stereotype of Americans or people in the US that it's more like, okay, I learned my first sugar push, so where can I compete now?
Yeah, it's funny because I never thought of it as a very competitive scene, the US scene, but actually there were quite a lot of competitions when I think about it, and it was kind of a common part of things, but it didn't have the same organized sport structure, and it didn't kind of fit in that sport slot that as Americans we saw a lot of times from the European dancers. And so in my mind, I haven't thought of it as a very competitive scene, but you're right, it was actually. And I don't know, it's hard to say if it's gotten more or less, because I could kind of see arguments on both sides. I remember it was a big deal because we were from Ithaca, New York, is like this small town in upstate New York, and we danced mostly on the East Coast. And the East Coast scene had a certain flavor, both stylistically and vibe-wise, of the people who did it. And I remember, like, maybe the second year of ALHC or something, when a lot of people from LA and from the West Coast came, and there was like such a strong difference of style and of approach to competition that, like, from our side, it felt like, wow, people were super competitive and really like kind of out to get everybody in this way. So it seemed super competitive, but actually there was competitions all over. So I don't know, it's a hard one to say.
Do you like competitions, or are you more like a social dancer?
I do like competitions. I wish I thrived on them a bit more. I'm not the most competitive person. I like to win, but it doesn't necessarily give me that push that I love that feeling when you go in a competition and something comes out that wouldn't necessarily come out on the social floor, that you add a little bit of pressure or a little bit of nerves or something, and you can, it's amazing, good and bad, the things that won't go out of your body. so for me, I love that part of it, and I love the chance to kind of to dance for people and watch other people dance in a heightened setting where it's a bit like a jam circle or something. Like you add a bit of pressure, and it makes what people, it gives a reason to watch each other in a certain heightened way. And I think historically and in my experience, it's been an important part of the dance and a positive part of the dance. I totally understand when people don't like it, or they don't, or they think it's negative, and there's certainly negative aspects of it. But to my mind, I mean, going back to the Savoy and even before, the very kind of birth of Lindy Hop, it's probably apocryphal, but is always, said that in a dance contest, Shorty and his partner kind of debuted Lindy Hop, and certainly when you read Frankie's book or Norma talk, the way that the weekly competitions at the Savoy functioned in kind of pushing the dance and helping professionalize the dance and draw people into it, make it exciting to go to the ballroom. And then of course the Harvest Moon Ball in New York had the similar kind of thing. It's clear that competition, performance, and social dancing, they've always kind of seemed like the three elements of the dance. And I would probably say that social dancing is the most important to me, but the other two have such an important role to play in the dance. And I would recommend to everybody, even if it's someone who doesn't think they would enjoy it. Well, if you know you wouldn't enjoy it, don't do it. It can be a real bummer. But yeah, I think if people are at all interested or want to explore the dance in a slightly different way, I think it's a really useful way to kind of explore your dancing, because again, historically it's been a part of the dance, and I think you learn something about yourself as a dancer by doing it.
I kind of enjoyed competing, but for me, I always feel like when it's a good competition, like it's amazing, it's the best feeling ever, but it goes in the other way exactly the same amount. So the thing, what I liked about competition when I started with it, especially in Check and Chill format, it always felt like it was the best social dance you could ever get, because both were giving 150%, and like you put not everything into this 5-hour party, but you put everything into this 3-minute dance, which makes so much energy and so much creativity. But like if you have a partner who just wants to shine for herself, or like for the followers, the same thing. If you have a leader who just doesn't care for you, it can be just as horrible and like in the opposite way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, well put. I can definitely relate to that. Yeah, I think that's right. And like you say, I mean, I think it's important not to take it as bad feedback when things go badly, and not to take it as particularly good feedback when things go well. I mean, I think that has served me pretty well, because I mean, definitely looking back, I can see the times when I feel like when I've been super proud of myself in a competition and really happy with the dancing that I've done, and it doesn't necessarily line up with the times that I've won, and vice versa, that I feel like, oh, that was terrible, and yet you win, which is still nice to win, but I don't know, it doesn't. If you do it, I would say don't let it affect your own sense too much of when you dance well and when you dance poorly, because it doesn't seem to line up necessarily.
That's so true. Sometimes you have dances where you feel like, oh my God, that was amazing. Judges see it differently, and sometimes you feel like, okay, if I win with that, I will lose my trust in the system.
Exactly.
And then you win, and you're like, okay, why?
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
Do you get nervous when you're competing, or dancing in general? Like, are there moments where you still get nerves, or is it more routine now?
No, I definitely get nerves, but I don't know exactly when it's gonna be that I get nerves. Say, like, normally if I'm gonna go out, and And in some ways, like I was saying earlier, I sort of wish I had more nerves. Like I wish competition would give me a bit more nerves in a way, because again, I think a lot of the reason I enjoy competing is that sense that, yeah, things are a little heightened, that you feel a little bit like, okay, something's on the line. I need to kind of reach deep and see what comes out that wouldn't just come out on a normal dance floor. And it can be, like I said, I find it a little bit hard to access that. So yeah, I think I often get nervous if when I'm going to perform something that I don't really know, and like if it's not choreography, if it's social dancing, I rarely get nervous. But if it's like, yeah, choreography or half choreography and half social dancing, then I can get nervous. But it's still, I don't quite know when it's going to hit or if it's going to hit, you know, because sometimes a big stage and what should feel like a lot of pressure just feels like, oh, this is no big deal. And then sometimes it can be, you know, very small stakes. There's only a few people in the room and it's just some random thing and I can feel like, woof, oh, I'm a little nervous. So,
I interviewed an opera singer a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was so funny because she said the problem is, for her, she always was nervous, but she always thought it would get better after a while. But she experienced the higher she climbed the ladder, the harder it got. So the higher she was, the more nervous she got. She just learned to deal with it differently. And I can 100% agree with that, because for me, like I usually, like I'm nervous when I'm performing, or like whenever I feel like there could something go wrong or there could be expectations not met. But the most nervous I can remember I was when I was teaching on my first international event, and I had to go social dancing because I was not somebody there, like I was as a teacher there. And I felt like, okay, if I screw up now in my social dancing, like everybody would like, are you teaching here? So like that really killed me.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Oh man, opera singers, that must be tricky because really I can't imagine needing to use your voice at that kind of level when you have nerves. Must be just a nightmare.
Yeah. So what do you do when you get nerves? Like how do you deal with it? Do you just accept it, or is there something you do?
Yeah, like I said, I usually if I'm going to perform or something, I actually kind of like when I feel a little bit nervous, because I feel like it gives me some energy and it helps it kind of feel like that there are stakes. And I think so often when you're dancing, I don't know, you want your movement to have some meaning and some kind of power behind it. And I think that sense that there's a little bit on the line and that you're a bit nervous about it, that can help kind of, yeah, make the movement actually meaningful. I mean, it's a fine line because a lot of times I think from nerves, you can just sort of let yourself and then things become very meaningless very quickly. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think usually if I'm warmed up, then the nerves, yeah, I can kind of just welcome it in. I think for a long time, I didn't know how to handle that. And so I could easily go more of that kind of direction of just like, okay, craziness. Like you mentioned that video with Ramona. I don't know that I was nervous necessarily, but my earlier dancing was definitely a lot more along these lines of just craziness. Who knows what's happening? But yeah, no, I try and kind of welcome it in a little bit and warm up with it, and then usually works for me.
Cool. When you think,
I'm also pretty not comfortable with messing up, but I'm resigned to the fact that I have a few partners in Frida and in Remy who like never mess up anything, and I'm just the guy who always messes up. So I've had to sort of learn to live with like, it's gonna happen. I'm gonna fuck something up very obviously, and so yeah, I think there's both sides of the equation. I've learned to live with it beforehand and learn to live with it afterwards as well.
What was your biggest mess up you remember? Like, what was the thing where you're like, oh shoot?
I mean, there's so many. There's so many. Yeah, I mean, they layer on top of each other. I think the first one that jumps to mind, because I mentioned Remy and Frida, is we were in Lithuania, and Frida and I were like pulling together like a little slow piece. We just put together a piece over the weekend, as we were planning class and stuff. And we were going to perform it, and we didn't get to practice it that much. So I really didn't know it. But it felt like, hey, we'll go, we'll give it a shot. And we were driving in the car with Remy, and I started telling like a story about a time that one of Frida and I's first competitions, maybe, or the first competition that we made a routine together, ULHS, many years ago. And it was a super fast song, and similar thing where we'd like made a choreography, and she was used to working with real professionals because she was in the Rhythm Hotshots. And so her and her partner, like, they could make choreography, they could kind of mark it, run through it a little bit, and be like, it's going to happen, you know what I mean? So I think she was used to working in that way, and sort of like half rehearsed it with me, and was sort of like, okay, cool, you've got it, I've got it, we're good. Little did she know that is not how I work. And oh man, we got out there, and like the beginning of the routine, just like we do something where we like go into some sort of sway, and I just like it, as I remember just like throwing my head back, and I think my brain just fell out the back of my head, and I just came up like totally light and free, and just fucked up the entire routine. The rest of it is just like, it's all messed up. And Frida's like screaming at me, trying to tell me what to do. And like, there's one point where you can really hear her like, ah! And I think everyone thought she was like, yeah, go for it. But like, I can tell, still listening to it, she's like, this is terrible. So I was telling Remy this story about when I messed up really big. And then we performed that night, and I just like totally fucked up. And it was one of those things where the music was quiet, and like the audience could hear us like talking of like, I don't know what comes next. You might even be able to hear it on the video. Really like, oh, wait, what? And Frida's like, oh, get it together. And then you can hear Remy from the outside, like from the audience, like telling that we're fucking up and being like, ah. Terrible. So it's a bit of a mess up within a mess up, that one. But there's so many. I mean, pick a video and I can tell you about the big mess up thing.
But I mean, the good thing is that most people don't see it when you mess up. I remember when I had Remy at our place, and there was your video from Jazz Rhythms going, and he told me like, that's the video where Skye messed up. I was like, where? I didn't see it. And he really had to point out like, see it there. I was like, I watched the video like 50 times or something like that because it's our entrance, and I never saw it. Like,
mission accomplished.
So...
Well, it's years of practice messing up, I tell you. When Remy and I, like right before we went on, oh, I mean, there's so many. Yeah, pick a video and you'll see it.
Crazy. Do you have a favorite performance, like something where you felt very good, where like, of you, yes.
Myself. No, I don't know. I mean, no, I don't think so. No. I mean, I like my performances, but I don't know that I would have a favorite now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have something for yourself where you feel like?
There's some competitions I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
But usually the competitions I'm proud of are usually the ones where I feel like I got the placement I deserved. Because as we said before, sometimes you don't get what you like. If the feeling and the results are in balance, not in balance, it doesn't it doesn't mean anything. But if it's like, and it goes both ways. So if you feel like you did an amazing job, and the judges don't see it that way, and you look at the video and like, damn it, but it was good. It did not only feel good, it looked good. It feels horrible. But if the other way around is the same thing. Like if you feel like you messed up completely and they give you good grade, like they give you good placement, it doesn't feel very good as well. So I like it the best when I feel like, okay, that what I delivered is what I got rewarded for.
Yeah.
That is
Right.
yeah, I like. And sometimes you have to get lucky. I don't really have that much problems. My one thing I always remember is I did contemporary before.
Oh yeah.
And
Cool.
the first time I was on stage with contemporary ballet, that was something like I shit my pants. Like
Yeah.
in couple dance, you always have at least somebody on your hand. But the first time on stage, like just by yourself, that is like super crazy. That was scary. But
Yeah,
other than that, nothing particular.
yeah. Yeah. Word. Yeah. Sounds right.
So, what makes a good dancer for you? If you would find a quality, like, and not like in a judging way or something like that, like not in a competitive way, but if what touches you in other dancers, like what is something that you say, like I could watch this person for hours?
Yeah, I mean it's a hard one to say. I think it's hard to put a finger on what exactly the quality is, but when you get that sense that someone has a way of moving, a way of being in their body that just kind of fits them, and they've sort of figured out how it is that they exist in the world, it's just so compelling. And I don't know, I mean, I can think of a lot of people who kind of have it, but how to isolate what exactly that is, I don't really know. I always loved silent movies growing up, and particularly like silent film comedians, Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd, and there's something so compelling about watching silent film, particularly silent comedy, and just like watching people do kind of everyday actions, but they do it in this sometimes very stylized, but sometimes just very unique to them kind of way that they've, maybe it's a heightened version of themselves or a heightened version of their body that they've flipped into some character, or it's just how they move, but it just kind of, they feel, yeah, I don't know, they've turned some key and figured out how it is that their body moves. So, and you can definitely see it, with people that walk in the door sometimes in a dance class where they just have that quality of sort of being in their own body, and they have a way of moving that just kind of works for them. It's not on someone else, it wouldn't necessarily be as compelling, but I don't know if that makes sense, but
It makes a lot of sense. Like I feel the same way. I just have a really hard time to put my finger on it, what it is. So I was hoping that you could help me there, but
no luck.
But it's crazy because sometimes it's you have people like I think we said this before. Like you have people that dance their ass off, and they do amazing things, and sometimes you have people that just do swing outs, and you're like, I'm blown away. I don't know what it is. I remember when I started Boogie Woogie, there was a dancer. He did not need to do a lot of things, but what he did was so good that you could watch him like just do 6 count change of place, like for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Different every time.
Yeah. Oh, it is great. Oh, I miss dancing.
So, but did you always know what you wanted to do? Like, did you always know you want to travel as a dancer? You want to teach dance, or was that more like an ongoing thing?
No, I think I always wanted dancing to be part of my life. Once I came around to it. But I was for a long time I was kind of worried that if I would make it a job, that I would stop enjoying it and not want to social dance and not that I might kind of ruin the enjoyment of it. So it was kind of a long process for me of doing it professionally and for a living, but still going to school and sort of, thinking that I would do something else and dance on the side. And then by the time I finished grad school, maybe a year out of grad school, and I was like, you know what, actually, I've been doing this for a living and I love it just as much as I did, and I don't want to do anything else. So it was a bit that I did it for a long time before I sort of admitted to myself that I would want to do it.
How did you get into teaching internationally? Like, was it coincidence? Like, did you push it? Like, did you pursue it actively, or did you just get asked by people, or how did this come about?
The scene was quite a bit smaller then, so it was a lot easier to kind of know what felt like you knew everybody. And at the time when I started dancing, it definitely didn't feel like, there were people who taught internationally, but I mean, there were a lot more old timers around, and then there was also just like, it didn't seem like something that you would work your way up and join that group of teachers. It was people like Ryan and Jenny and Steven and people who and Sylvia, people who'd worked with the old timers and stuff, and felt like, how would you wouldn't teach alongside them. So it never really occurred to me to teach internationally, at least at first. But people would kind of ask. We taught a little locally, and then from there, kind of being around, going around to competitions, performing around. I had a little group with my friends from school. We had a group called Mini Smoochers that Ramona was in, and a bunch of other people, Andy Reid, Caitlin George, a bunch of folks who, some of whom still dance, and some who just dance for fun, and then some who don't really dance regularly anymore. And we went around and kind of performed different places. And Frankie Manning was kind enough to have us at his birthday party in New York a couple of times. And so I think from that, we kind of got known in the scene, and then people would want moochers to teach somewhere, teach a couple taster classes or something if we were performing. So we started to do that at kind of regional or national events. And from there, kind of built internationally. At one point, Leonard, who from the Hot Shots and from Harangue, he wanted to have moochers over to Harangue. I'm sure more of an opportunity for us than a something for the camp, but it was very, very nice and very generous that the Harangue had us over, and we performed and we did a little bit of teaching, everybody in the group. And so sort of from that experience, I started teaching internationally, but yeah, it was pretty organic the way it grew, and wasn't necessarily something I pursued. I was always very happy for the opportunity and tried to make the most of it, but yeah, it was pretty lucky just being around when the scene was small enough that if someone was going to teach, you had a pretty good chance of being that person.
I have sometimes people, like, I usually ask people what they want from the dance, because they, like, especially students in private, because if they, it's just a different kind of work. If they just want to have a hobby which they enjoy and they go to a festival once a year, or if they tell me I want to teach on festivals and I want to be one of the best and stuff like that. So, to me, it's always interesting. How do you think it's different to get into the scene of teaching today than it was back when you started? Or is it
interesting question? Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's more, the scene in general, I think, is more professionalized. I mean, it's always hard to say because kind of wherever you start geographically, the character of the scene near you is going to kind of shape your sense of it. So, and I started when I was quite young, so I have kind of perhaps a naive view of the scene. But yeah, I do, in my mind, I think it's much more professionalized now, even if it's kind of only semi-professionalized. And so I do think it's a different thing to start teaching now. At the same time, I think like I always recommend if someone wants to start teaching that they, you know, that really working locally and like seeing what it's like to rent a church hall and put up flyers and have people come to your classes and try and get them into a dance scene is such a sort of exciting experience. And it's such a sort of like the fundamental teaching Lindy Hop experience that I feel like that is open to so many people to find an area where there aren't really classes and to start them. And it's such a cool experience to get to share the dance in that way. But yeah, I think it's it's different. I don't know how different it is other than that.
I told you that before that I'm going to ask you that, and I think it's a good moment for that. So if you would give yourself advice, like if you would have the chance to give yourself from 15 years ago an advice, what would it be?
Specifically about teaching or about dancing, or?
Like in general, it can be anything. What do you think would be the thing you need to hear?
I think for myself, I mean, this was ultimately advice that somehow I got up, you know, some way. I don't really know how, and probably people have been trying to tell me, so I don't know that anyone telling me would have been very useful. But I think for me, there was a huge change in my dancing and my teaching and my approach to the dance. When I sort of started to really dig into the music in a different way. I think I'd always been interested in swing music and in jazz a little bit, but I came to dancing mainly as a dancer, and I love the physical experience of moving my body and really, the physicality of the thing was what drew me to it, and the partnering. And the music, I liked some songs, I didn't like other songs, but it was a little bit like I would dance to anything. And I think if earlier I really could have taken a little bit of time and dug into the music and recognized the connection between the movement and the music, that would have saved me a lot of time, I think, of stabbing around in the dark. Because I think that I can really kind of almost trace the beginning of my dancing to that moment. And there's a good 10 years where I was dancing and I wasn't kind of taking the music into account, or I hadn't found myself in the music.
If that speaks to people, like where would you recommend them to start? If people are like, okay, that makes sense for me, but how do I approach that? Like how do you start paying more attention to the music and getting into the music?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a little bit different for everybody. That one of the great things with jazz is that it's such a varied and diverse kind of art form. So luckily, I think there's an entry point for everyone, but it's probably not the same entry point. I think for me, actually, like getting some books that talked about the music was a great way to start, and actually being able to read about it a little bit, because I've always been someone who loves to read and kind of likes to process information in that way. So whether it was biographies or just essays about music, the writings of Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray were two kind of entry points that were really important for me. But another approach I would also recommend is, I think so often we, as dancers, we listen to the small sliver of jazz that's dance music. And I mean, one of the great things about jazz is that it was super popular for a large chunk of time. And so there's a lot of songs that were sort of like the hit songs of their day, but aren't necessarily anything you'd hear at the dance. So in some ways, I almost feel like as a dancer who wants to get more into jazz music and connect to the music a little bit more, I would actually recommend go out and get some, either compile yourself a list or get your hands somehow on the music that you don't hear at the dance. Mm-hmm. So something like Body and Soul by Coleman Hawkins, or Stardust by Louis Armstrong, or you can just go down a list of kind of the great hits of jazz, West End Blues by Louis Armstrong. Just kind of there's so many songs that are amazing, but you'll never hear them at a dance. And I think actually kind of hearing those, they can often draw us in a lot more because they were hits. Hits in a pop way that we might respond to a little bit more. And I think through that, a lot of times then you can appreciate what the swing element in the music is doing and the more up-tempo stuff. So I can definitely trace that for myself. One other thing I'd recommend is, I think pretty early on, I kind of realized that I really loved Teddy Wilson, the pianist Teddy Wilson. And I can really remember, I don't remember where I was, but I can really remember when the first time I heard a Teddy Wilson song, and I was like, man, I just love the feel of the piano in this song. And I don't know why. And when I looked that up, it was Teddy Wilson. And I was like, oh, right, yeah, I really like that other song by Teddy Wilson. I love this. And it was the first time I kind of recognized the approach to an instrument of a jazz musician. And that was another kind of light bulb moment for me to kind of feel like I got to know a musician a little bit well enough to recognize some of their individuality. Which I think a lot of times when we're on the dance floor, that part gets a little bit lost, that the music is a little bit background. And one of the great appeals of jazz is the amazing individuality and the amazing kind of characters that there are in jazz. And so kind of getting to know those characters a little bit is another great in.
Awesome. Thank you a lot for taking your time.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, and nice to see you. And I hope this is fun. I can't wait to be on a dance floor again.
Yeah, me too.
To talk about dancing when we can't dance.
Yeah, I hope you come back to Augsburg someday. It would be really awesome having you here. Doesn't have to be a crossover event, can be an event.
All right, cool.
You have a standing invitation, so whenever you want to come, just come. And we put it in the weekend you want to come.
I hope it's soon. That sounds great. Good to see you, man.
Say hi to your family and...
We'll do. Yeah, it's actually... I'm going to get the little boy up now.
Yeah. So, and take care. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.